Thanks for joining us here on Focus in Africa from BBC News. Zimbabwe's parliament has voted in favor of a bill that will punish citizens for unpatriotic acts. The controversial so-called patriot clause of the Criminal Law Act targets those who harm the national interest of Zimbabwe. It will now go to the Senate before being signed into law. Those found guilty face up to 20 years in jail or the death penalty. Critics have called it a dark day for democracy. Let's get more now. I'm joined by the BBC correspondent Shingai Nyoka, who's in Harare. They're calling it a dark day for democracy. Strong words indeed. Shingai, what does the bill say?
Well, essentially, Parliament is trying to create a new crime and I quote, willfully damaging the sovereignty and national interest of Zimbabwe. So there are various elements to this particular crime. They say that citizens, either locally or abroad, who take part in a meeting with a foreign agent of a foreign government with the intention of an armed intervention or with the intention of overthrowing the country. And thirdly, those who meet wanting to apply sanctions, not just to the country, but also to officials, will be found guilty of this crime. And as you mentioned there, the penalties are quite tough, ranging from a fine for those that are found guilty of inviting sanctions on this country, but also up to 20 years in jail and the death penalty for those who take part in a foreign government armed intervention. But it also wants to strip citizenship from those who are found guilty and also from permanent residence. So there's been a huge outcry as a result of this law being passed in the lower house of Parliament.
Indeed, so it seems as if it covers quite a wide spectrum. But what exactly was the smoking gun behind this bill, I beg your pardon? What brought it about?
Well, the government has been mulling this for many, many years, starting from about 20 years ago when the US and the European Union, including Britain, had imposed sanctions on the then Mugabe government, as well as on senior government officials and those in the military for alleged human rights violations. And at the time, the government was in an uproar because it said that it was partly due to the pressure from the opposition and from human rights groups. And so for many, many years, they've been mulling a law and threatening to enact a law like this. So it's now under President Mnangagwa that they have finally gone ahead with it and brought it before Parliament. As I mentioned, President Mnangagwa himself is under sanctions by the US, as well as many of the senior government officials. And what they are trying to do is to stop opposition members, as well as human rights defenders, from what they say demonizing the country when they go out and speak on international platforms about the alleged human rights violations of this government.
And do we know when this law will come into effect, or how soon, rather, it'll come into effect once it's signed into law?
Well, it could come into effect almost immediately. There's a process now where after it's been passed by the lower house, it'll move towards the Senate, and where there's an expectation that it will also sail through the Senate. In the lower house, it was 99 yeses versus 17 noes, and the Senate has a similar composition where the ruling party commands more than 2/3 of majority. So it should sail through there, after which it's up to the president to decide when he wants to sign it into law. But it could be very, very soon, Peter.
Very interesting. Shingai Nyoka there in Harare, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed with that story. Much appreciated.